It was early October 2019 when I decided to spend a quiet weekend camping alone in the northern part of Maine. I'd taken a few solo trips before, but this time felt different from the start. The air had that kind of heavy chill that seeps into your jacket even before the rain begins. I remember checking the forecast before leaving. It mentioned a light drizzle, nothing serious. I thought it would make the forest more peaceful. I packed my old green tent, a sleeping bag, a small hatchet, my lighter, a lantern, and just enough food for 2 nights. I parked my truck near a narrow dirt road and hiked about 2 miles into the woods before finding a flat spot near a stream. The place looked perfect. A small clearing surrounded by tall pines, with moss covering the ground and the faint sound of running water not too far away. It was almost silent except for the wind brushing through the branches. I set up my tent, gathered some wood before the sky went gray, and sat for a while just listening to the forest. As the evening started closing in, I made a small fire. I remember that orange light flickering against the wet bark and how the smoke drifted low because the air was thick with moisture. It started raining lightly around 8 p.m., a slow, steady drizzle that made the fire hiss. I pulled my jacket tighter, tossed another log on, and tried to enjoy the quiet. But something about the night felt off. The rain made everything sound muffled. There was no rustling, no chirping, no movement, just the sound of water falling and the fire crackling. I turned off my lantern after the fire burned low and crawled into my tent. The rain grew heavier, hitting the nylon in a steady rhythm. I lay there for a long time, staring at the fabric ceiling above me, thinking about how far I was from anyone. There was no cell signal here. The only way out was that narrow trail leading back to the truck. I didn't feel scared then, just uneasy, like something about the woods didn't want me there. Around midnight, I woke up to a sound. It wasn't thunder, and it wasn't the rain. It was faint, but sharp, a snapping sound like a stick breaking close by. I froze and listened. The rain made it hard to tell how far it was, but it didn't sound distant. Then another snap, a slower, heavier one. My first thought was that it was probably a deer moving through the woods, but the steps weren't spaced out like an animal. They sounded careful, too careful. I reached for my flashlight and pointed it toward the tent wall. The fabric lit up pale white, but I couldn't see anything outside. The rain hit harder, drowning out smaller sounds, but every now and then, between the gusts of wind, I could hear faint movement. I tried to convince myself it was just branches shifting from the weight of the rain. Still, my heartbeat wouldn't slow down. After what felt like an hour, I finally dozed off again. But I woke up once more, this time to something much closer. A deep rustling sound, right outside the tent. It wasn't fast or loud, just the sound of wet clothing brushing against something. I could almost feel the vibration of footsteps in the soft ground. My mouth went dry. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just listened. Then I saw it, the faintest silhouette pressing against the side of the tent. Not a full shadow, but enough to make out the shape of someone standing just a few feet away. I could see the outline of a shoulder, maybe an arm. My mind started racing. I thought maybe it was a lost hiker, maybe someone who'd gotten turned around in the rain. But then it moved, slowly, circling halfway around the tent before stopping again. I wanted to yell or unzip the tent, but something in me said not to. I stayed still, clutching the flashlight, listening to the rain drown everything out. After a few minutes, the sound faded. The shape disappeared. I didn't move for a long time after that. I think I must have sat there frozen for at least half an hour before I finally unzipped the flap just an inch and looked out. My light barely reached a few feet in front of me, reflecting off the mist and rain. Nothing. The ground was soaked, the fire completely dead, and everything looked untouched. I tried to sleep again but couldn't. The rain kept coming down hard, and my nerves were shot. Around 3 a.m., I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I started packing what I could inside the tent. I just wanted to get back to the truck. I threw everything into my pack, zipped it up, and crawled out. The rain hit my face immediately, cold and heavy. The forest was pitch dark except for the faint white of my flashlight beam. When I turned toward the direction of the trail, I stopped dead. There were footprints in the mud. Not animal prints, clear boot marks. Fresh ones. They came from the woods and stopped only a few feet from my tent. I knelt down and ran my light over them. The mud around them was deep, meaning whoever it was had been standing there for a while. My stomach dropped. I followed the prints with my light, and they trailed off back into the trees. I couldn't see where they went, but they didn't lead toward the stream or any normal path, just deeper into the woods. I stood there in the rain, gripping the flashlight so tight my knuckles hurt, trying to listen for movement. Nothing, just rain. I started walking fast, following the small orange reflectors I'd hung on branches earlier to mark the way back. Every noise made me turn. My boots sank into the mud, the rain dripping from my hood and down my neck. I walked for what felt like forever, but the forest didn't look familiar anymore. The trees were packed tighter, and the ground was uneven. I realized I'd gone off trail somehow. My heart started pounding faster. I turned around, trying to retrace my steps, but the rain had already blurred the footprints and washed out any sign of the reflectors. Everything looked the same: black trees, wet ground, and a white haze in the flashlight's beam. I forced myself to keep moving in one direction, hoping I'd hit the dirt road eventually. After another 15 minutes of walking, I saw something ahead through the rain. A dim light, like a lantern or flashlight. Relief hit me for a second. I thought maybe it was a ranger or another camper. I waved my light, trying to get attention, but the light didn't move. It just stayed still, half hidden between the trees. I walked a few steps closer, but something felt wrong. The light wasn't flickering or swinging. It looked fixed, like someone was standing perfectly still, holding it up at chest level. I froze again. The rain hit my hood, the sound deafening in my ears. I could barely see beyond that faint glow, but I didn't hear a voice or see any movement. Then, as my flashlight beam reached closer, the light ahead suddenly went out. Completely. I didn't think. I just turned and started running. My boots slipped in the mud, branches scratched my arms, but I didn't stop until I saw the reflection of my truck lights through the trees. When I reached it, I jumped inside, locked the doors, and sat there breathing hard, soaking wet. My windshield was fogged, the rain pounding on the roof. I started the engine and turned on the headlights. For a moment, I thought I saw something between the trees, just the faintest movement, but I didn't stick around to find out. I backed up fast and drove down that muddy road until I hit pavement again. By the time I reached town, it was almost dawn. The rain had eased, and everything looked normal again. I parked outside a diner and just sat there for a while, staring at my reflection in the mirror, trying to process what had happened. There was no reason for anyone to be out there that night. The spot was miles from any main trail or road. I never found out who it was, or why they'd been standing so close to my tent in the middle of that storm. I still have that tent, though I haven't used it since. Sometimes, when it rains at night, I catch myself listening for that same sound. The slow, heavy steps just outside, moving carefully, almost too quietly, like they're trying not to wake me. And every time I hear the rain, I remember that night in Maine and how close someone had been, watching, waiting, for reasons I'll never know. It was the summer of 2016, and I was 24 when I decided to take a solo camping trip out in rural Kansas. I'd been stressed from work and wanted a break from screens and city noise, just some quiet time away from everything. I didn't want to go to a public campsite either, So I found this old farm listed on some local outdoors forum, someone's family property that allowed camping for a small fee. It wasn't much more than a few overgrown fields, a broken barn, and some scattered trees. The man who owned it told me over email that nobody really lived there anymore, not since his father passed, and that I could pitch my tent anywhere I liked. It sounded perfect, private and quiet. I arrived in the late afternoon after a 4-hour drive. The place was almost too quiet. The road to get there turned from asphalt to gravel, then to a dirt path that cut between tall grass and a rusted wire fence. I stopped my car near the barn and got out. The air smelled like dry hay and old soil. The only sound was the wind moving through the grass. The barn itself looked like it hadn't been touched in years. The roof sagged in the middle, and a few boards on the sides were loose or missing. The doors were half open, and inside I could see piles of hay, an old tractor, and some wooden crates stacked in the corner. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust. I found a decent flat spot about 50 yards away from the barn, near a small line of trees. I pitched my tent there, facing the open field. By the time I got everything set up, the sun was starting to go down. The sky turned orange, then pink, and the shadows stretched long across the ground. I cooked a small meal on my camping stove, some canned chili, and ate sitting on an old log near the fire I made. The crickets started chirping as the sky turned dark. Felt peaceful, almost perfect, the kind of quiet that presses on your ears. But around 9 p.m., I started to notice something odd. The wind had died completely, but the grass out near the edge of the field was moving, bending slightly as if something was brushing through it. I figured it was an animal, maybe a coyote or a stray cow. I wasn't worried at first. Farms always had animals wandering around. Later that night, maybe closer to 11, I was sitting by the fire, staring at the flames when I heard a sharp cracking sound. It came from the direction of the barn. It sounded like wood snapping, maybe a plank falling or something stepping on a dry stick. I turned my flashlight toward it and held it there for a while. The beam hit the side of the barn, and I could see dust floating in the light, but nothing moved. I tried to shake it off, probably just the old wood settling. I went into my tent around midnight. The fire was low, but I left it burning a little for light. The ground felt colder than I expected, and I had trouble falling asleep. I kept hearing faint sounds, rustling in the grass, soft crunches of footsteps, or maybe just the wind picking up again. At one point, I thought I heard breathing outside, slow and uneven. I held still for a while, just listening. My heart was beating so loud I could hear it in my ears. I told myself not to panic, that I was just letting my mind run wild. But then I heard it again, something brushing against the tent wall from the outside. A slow drag like a hand or a stick moving across the fabric. I sat up instantly, barely breathing. I reached for my flashlight and clicked it on, shining it through the thin tent material. There was a shape there right outside the wall. It didn't move when I pointed the light at it. It was tall, taller than me, and narrow with shoulders that looked too sharp. I froze completely. After a few seconds, the shape moved away quietly, disappearing into the night. I didn't unzip the tent or make a sound. I just sat there for what felt like hours, gripping the flashlight and listening to every small noise. I eventually convinced myself that maybe it was a shadow or my eyes playing tricks. When you're alone out there, every sound feels bigger, every shadow heavier. I must have dozed off around 3 a.m., but I woke up again suddenly, feeling this deep sense that something wasn't right. It was pitch black now. My fire had gone out completely. The tent felt colder, like the air itself had changed. That's when I noticed the faint smell. Something sour and metallic, like old blood or wet metal. I pushed myself up and listened again. I could hear faint steps, moving slowly around my tent, circling it. They were heavy, deliberate, not like an animal's. I didn't move, I didn't make a sound. The steps stopped right outside my tent door. I could hear breathing again, rough and unsteady, way too close. Then I saw the shadow of feet against the thin tent wall. Human feet. Someone was standing right there. Every instinct in me screamed to yell, to do something, but I just stayed still, frozen. After a long, tense moment, the person, or whatever it was, moved away toward the barn. I waited for another 10 minutes before I unzipped the tent just enough to look outside. The field was empty, but I saw movement near the barn. Something was standing in the open doorway, facing my direction. It looked like a man, but the way he stood was strange. Arms hanging low, back slightly bent. He wasn't moving, just standing there, watching. I ducked back into the tent and packed up as quietly as I could. My hands were shaking so bad that I dropped my flashlight twice. I decided to leave everything else and just take the essentials: my keys, phone, and bag. I unzipped the tent slowly and crawled out. The air felt thick, heavy, and cold. I kept my flashlight low to the ground and started walking toward my car. The gravel crunched under my boots, and I winced with every sound. When I glanced toward the barn again, the figure was gone. That made it worse. I moved faster, almost running. When I finally reached my car, I yanked the door open and got in, locking it immediately. I sat there, breathing hard, trying to calm down before starting the engine. My hands were shaking so bad that it took a few tries to get the key in. As soon as the engine started, my headlights came on, and that's when I saw him. He was standing at the edge of the field, right where my tent had been. His face was pale, almost gray, and he looked thin, like he hadn't eaten in days. His clothes were torn, muddy, and hanging off his frame. He was just standing there, staring at my car, unmoving. I slammed the car into reverse and tore down the dirt path without looking back. I didn't stop until I hit the main road and saw lights again. I drove straight to a motel about 40 minutes away and sat in the parking lot for a long time before I could even get out. The next morning, I called the guy who owned the property and told him someone had been out there. He sounded surprised, said nobody had been to that farm in years and that the place was supposed to be empty. I didn't tell him everything. I just said there was someone wandering around near the barn at night. He said he'd drive out there to check, but I never heard back after that, and I didn't care to follow up. A week later, I saw a small news article online about a man's remains found in a field outside the same town. They said he was likely a drifter who'd been living off abandoned farms, maybe even for years. The article said he might have been mentally unstable, surviving off whatever he could find. They didn't mention the name of the property, but I knew that was the last time I ever went camping alone. Every time I see an empty barn or open field now, I get this sick feeling in my chest. I can still picture him standing there in the headlights, watching me leave, and I wonder how long he'd been living out there, how many nights he'd watched campers before me. I still think about that night sometimes, how close I came to unzipping the tent when I first heard him, how lucky I was that I didn't. I was 28 the summer I decided to camp alone near the foothills of Montana. I'd been driving for nearly 8 hours from Spokane, just wanting a few days away from everything. No city noise, no phone service, just me in the woods. It was early August of 2019, and the air was thick with heat and the faint smell of pine sap. I reached the spot just before evening, a small clearing beside a narrow creek. It wasn't an official campsite, just a place I'd marked on a map after scrolling through satellite images. There were tire marks on the dirt path, so I figured other campers or hunters had been here before. I parked my old Subaru near a big fallen log, unloaded my gear, and pitched my tent facing the creek. The sound of running water was comforting. The stream wasn't deep, maybe up to my knees, but it wound through the woods like a silver ribbon, catching bits of fading sunlight. I boiled water, ate a quick meal from a pouch, and watched the light dim behind the trees. When night came, it came fast. The air turned cool and the crickets started up. The woods had that quiet, layered sound, insects, a distant owl, and the occasional rustle of leaves. I had a small fire going, crackling low. It felt peaceful, but there's always something different about being alone in the woods at night. It's not what you see that unsettles you, it's what you can't see. That thick blackness between the trees where the light doesn't reach. I stayed up until around 11, then crawled into my sleeping bag. The creek kept gurgling outside, steady and calm. I drifted off to sleep. Sometime in the night, I woke up to a faint noise. It was subtle, a crunching sound, like someone stepping slowly on gravel or dry leaves. I froze. My mind told me it was probably an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon. Still, it was close, too close. The sound came again, this time slower. Crunch, pause, crunch, then nothing, just silence and the creek again. I waited, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. After a few minutes, I reached for my flashlight and clicked it on. The light hit the inside of the tent first. My boots, my pack, the zipper door. I unzipped it slowly, trying to stay quiet. The beam caught the fog rising off the creek. Nothing moved. I stepped outside. The air felt heavier, damp and cold against my skin. I swept the light left and right, scanning the treeline. Nothing, but something felt off. You can tell when you're being watched, your body knows before your brain does. The hair on my neck stood up. I turned off the flashlight to let my eyes adjust. The moon was out, faint behind some clouds. I stood still for a long time, maybe 10 minutes, listening. Eventually, I convinced myself it was an animal and went back inside. But I didn't sleep much after that. By morning, everything looked normal again. Birds were chirping, sunlight glinted off the creek, and it almost felt stupid to be scared. I made coffee, packed a small bag, and went hiking uphill for a few hours. When I got back, though, something immediately felt different. My tent flap was open. I was certain I'd zipped it closed before leaving. Inside, things were moved around, not destroyed, just shifted. My sleeping bag was half unrolled, and one of my food containers was sitting by the entrance, opened. I checked the cooler, it was fine. No claw marks or chewed plastic. If it had been an animal, there would have been a mess. But everything looked too deliberate, too human. The skin between my shoulders tightened. I checked the ground outside, but the dirt was dry and hard. No footprints I could make out. The whole area looked undisturbed. Still, I couldn't shake it. Someone had been there. I decided to stay one more night, mostly because I didn't want to admit I was spooked. I told myself maybe a hiker came by, maybe a hunter, but the thought wouldn't settle right in my head. That evening, clouds started rolling in, and the air turned sticky. The forecast had said light rain, but by the time the sun disappeared, the wind picked up hard. My fire barely stayed lit before I gave up and zipped myself into the tent. Rain started tapping against the nylon, light at first, then steady. The creek grew louder, the wind louder still. Around midnight, I heard it again, that crunching sound. This time it was closer, moving around the perimeter of my tent. I held my breath and turned off my small lantern. My heart was pounding again, harder than before. The rain made it difficult to hear, but there were moments between gusts where the sound of steps was clear. Slow, careful steps circling. I reached for the small hatchet I kept by my sleeping bag. My hand was shaking. The sound stopped right behind the tent, just a few feet from my head. The nylon fabric moved slightly from the wind, but this was different. I could feel the stillness outside. I whispered to myself to calm down, barely breathing. Then I saw a faint shadow through the fabric. Not clear, just a darker patch against the dim glow of the rain-diffused sky. It wasn't an animal shape. It was upright, human height, Every muscle in my body locked up. I sat there for maybe a full minute, frozen, gripping the handle of the hatchet so tightly my knuckles hurt. Then, just as quietly as it came, the shadow moved away. The sound of steps faded toward the creek. I stayed awake until dawn, never unzipping the tent, never moving. The rain finally stopped around 4. When the sky lightened, I went outside. The ground was soaked, soft enough to show tracks. I walked slowly around the tent. There were prints, not boots, bare feet. They weren't mine. The prints led from the woods to the back of the tent, then down to the creek. They disappeared into the water. I followed along the bank for a while, but there was nothing else. No discarded clothes, no campsite, nothing. Just those footprints ending in the stream like whoever it was had walked straight into it. That was it for me. I packed everything fast, heart racing the whole time. I didn't even bother to eat breakfast. The forest felt different now, heavier, like it was pressing against me. Every sound, the dripping trees, a branch cracking, felt too close. When I reached my car, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. On the passenger side door, just below the handle, was a single muddy handprint. I drove out of there fast. My hands were trembling so bad on the wheel I could barely hold it straight. I didn't stop until I reached the highway. That night, in a motel 2 towns over, I sat in the shower for nearly an hour, just trying to shake the image of that handprint. The more I thought about it, the worse it got. Whoever had been there, they hadn't just wandered by. They'd been watching me. They'd come right up to where I slept, maybe even touched the tent while I was inside. I filed a report with the local sheriff's office the next morning. The deputy listened, took notes, and told me they'd checked the area. A week later, he called to say they didn't find anything. No signs of anyone living out there, no missing persons, nothing. I never went camping alone again after that. Even now, years later, whenever I hear rain on a tent or even just see the rippling surface of a creek, that same cold feeling crawls up my spine, because I keep thinking about those footprints, how they stopped at the edge of the water, how there was no sign of anyone coming back out, and how something about that handprint on my car door looked too deliberate, like it wasn't smeared from rain or accident. It was placed there, like a reminder that I wasn't alone that night. It was late October of 2013 when I decided to spend a weekend hunting alone in the woods outside Missoula, Montana. I'd gone hunting plenty of times before, usually with friends or my uncle, but that fall I wanted to go by myself. Just me, my rifle, and the quiet. I was 27 then, working construction through the week, and the noise of the city had been getting under my skin. I wanted to be somewhere where I could hear the wind and nothing else. I told myself it would be a peaceful trip. The place I went to was about 30 miles off the main road, past an old logging trail that cut through thick pine. The land had been clear-cut decades ago and never really recovered. Patches of open field mixed with broken trees, and a small stream running along the edge. It wasn't public land, but the owner had no problem with hunters using it, as long as you cleaned up after yourself. I drove out early that Friday morning in my old Chevy truck, the bed loaded with camping gear, a small cooler, and my .308 rifle. The air was cold, around 38 degrees, and the fog sat heavy on the ground. When I reached the trail, I parked just before the dirt got too soft, threw on my backpack, and hiked the rest of the way in. The walk took about 40 minutes, uphill for most of it. I found a clearing big enough for a tent near the tree line and set up camp. Pitched the tent, built a small fire pit out of rocks, stacked some firewood I'd brought, and hung my food high in a tree. By noon, I had the camp settled and decided to scout for deer sign. The area was quiet, too quiet actually. Usually, I'd hear birds, squirrels, maybe the distant crunch of a branch from a deer moving through. That day, it felt like the whole forest was holding its breath. Even the wind had that strange hollow sound when it moved through the trees, like it was passing through something old and empty. I followed a game trail down toward the stream. I saw tracks, deer maybe a day or two old, but they were heading deeper into the woods. I marked the spot with some orange tape and made a mental note to come back early the next morning. The day passed slowly, and by evening, the fog rolled back in, thicker than before. I cooked some beans and jerky on the camp stove, ate sitting on a log, and watched the light fade. I remember thinking how peaceful it was. I didn't realize that was the last time the trip would feel peaceful. That night, the forest came alive in a way I didn't like. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of something moving near the camp. It wasn't close, maybe 20 yards out, but I could hear it, slow, heavy steps breaking through the underbrush. I lay still, listening. At first, I thought it was a deer, but then I heard what sounded like a cough or a grunt, short, low, rough. It wasn't a deer. I unzipped the tent slowly, trying not to make noise, and looked out. The fire had burned down to embers, but the light was enough to see the fog hanging low over the ground. I didn't see anything, just shadows. I waited, eyes fixed on the dark edge of the trees. Then I heard it again, a crunch, closer this time. I reached for my rifle and rested it across my lap, finger off the trigger. I sat like that for nearly half an hour, watching, listening. Eventually, the sound faded away into the distance, and I told myself it was probably a bear passing through. But I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, everything looked normal. The fog was gone, and the sun came out early, cutting through the trees. I checked around the camp. No tracks I could clearly see, just some disturbed leaves and flattened grass near the edge. I brushed it off and packed up to head back down the game trail I'd marked. By noon, I was about a mile from camp when I noticed something strange. There was a tree, a tall pine with its bark stripped halfway up, like something had clawed at it. Bears do that sometimes, marking territory, but this looked higher than a bear could reach. The wood underneath was fresh, still pale. I felt uneasy, but I kept going. I didn't see a single deer that day. The woods were too still again, like everything living had moved somewhere else. Even the air felt wrong, thick, heavy, like before a storm, though the sky was clear. Around 4 p.m., I started heading back to camp, figuring I'd try again at dawn. When I got close to camp, I saw something that made my stomach tighten. My tent flap was open. I was sure I'd zipped it when I left. I dropped my rifle down and looked around carefully. No sign of anyone. I checked my supplies, nothing missing, nothing stolen. Even the cooler was still tied shut. But whoever or whatever opened that tent had gone through my stuff. My sleeping bag was half unrolled, and my flashlight was lying on the ground outside. That night, I built the fire bigger. The flames made me feel safer, even though I knew they probably did the opposite, lit me up for anything watching. I stayed awake for a long time, sitting beside the fire with my rifle across my knees. Around midnight again, I heard it. The same sound as before, slow steps in the dark, circling. I aimed toward the noise but didn't see a thing. The sound stopped. I waited, but it didn't come back. I must have dozed off sometime after that because I woke up near dawn, the fire nearly dead and the forest gray and cold. That morning, I decided I'd had enough. Hunting didn't matter anymore. I packed everything as fast as I could, tied down the gear, and started walking back toward the truck. The woods were quiet again, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I stopped, I thought I heard something behind me. A branch snap, a faint rustle. About halfway back, I came across fresh footprints in the mud near the trail. They weren't mine. They were too big, and the stride was longer. Whoever made them wasn't wearing boots either. The prints were bare, human feet wide, flat, deep in the mud like they were heavy. My heart started pounding. I followed them with my eyes for a few feet until they veered off into the brush. That was enough for me. I picked up the pace and didn't stop again until I saw my truck through the trees. When I reached it, everything was just how I left it. I tossed my gear in the back, started the engine, and didn't even look back. The road out felt twice as long. The whole drive home, I kept checking the rearview mirror, even though I knew how stupid that was. I didn't see anything following, but I didn't feel right either. When I got home, I unpacked the truck, washed up, and sat in silence for a while. I kept thinking about the bare footprints, the tent being opened, the strange quiet. I tried to tell myself it was just some drifter or hunter messing around, but deep down I knew that wasn't it. There wasn't a single track of vehicle tires, no cigarette butts, no signs of anyone camping nearby, just me out there. A few weeks later, I went back out that way with a friend, just to see. The clearing was still there, but the fire pit was scattered, the rocks pushed over like something had kicked through it. My orange tape on the game trail was gone, and when we walked a little further toward the stream, there it was again. Another tree stripped clean halfway up, the wood fresh, like it had just happened. That was the last time I ever hunted alone. I still go out sometimes, but only with a group. I never told anyone the full story. When people ask, I just say I had a bad trip, ran into a bear maybe. But sometimes, when I'm deep in the woods and the wind dies down for just a second, I swear I can still hear those slow, heavy steps in the distance, the sound of something that knows the woods better than I ever will. It was the summer of 2016 when I decided to drive out to northern Arizona for a short solo camping trip. I just turned 27, and life felt too repetitive: work, sleep, repeat. I wanted a few quiet days off-grid. I'd driven through Flagstaff once before, and I remembered the vast emptiness outside town. Endless pines, long dirt roads, red dust that clung to your shoes. That was exactly what I was looking for. I found a remote area online, about 2 hours northeast of Flagstaff, near the edge of Navajo land. The post said there was an open clearing used by hunters in the fall. No rangers, no noise, no people. It sounded perfect. I packed everything: tent, sleeping bag, small cooler, flashlight, knife, extra batteries, and a small folding chair. When I got there, it was just what I hoped for. The place looked untouched. Tall ponderosa pines around a wide flat space with dry grass and a few large rocks. I set up camp near the treeline so I could still see the open sky. The first evening was calm. The air smelled like dry pine and dust. I made a small fire, cooked some noodles, and watched the sunset. There wasn't a single sound of traffic or people, just wind, insects, and the crackle of my fire. That night, I didn't sleep much. The air was cold, and every small noise felt amplified. I could hear branches snapping somewhere far off. I told myself it was deer or elk moving through, but it didn't sound like four-legged movement. It was slow, like careful, dragging steps. I didn't get up, though. I just lay in my sleeping bag, listening, trying not to breathe too loud. By morning, everything was normal again. The sun was warm, birds were moving through the trees, and I felt stupid for being so tense. I hiked around a bit, followed a dry creek bed, and took photos. The quiet was addictive. Around noon, I walked about half a mile away from my camp just to explore. That's when I noticed something odd: footprints.
Bare footprints.
The ground was dry, but there were faint prints in the dust, leading from the treeline toward my general direction. At first, I thought maybe someone had been camping nearby, but the prints were strange. They looked human but not quite right. Too long, the toes oddly spread apart, and deep at the heel like whoever made them was heavy or walking hard. There were no shoe marks around, no tire tracks, no sign of anyone else. The prints stopped after a few yards, like the person just stepped off the ground and disappeared. It bothered me, but I didn't have much to go on. I went back to camp and tried not to think about it. I spent the rest of the day reading and collecting wood. By late afternoon, clouds rolled in and the air felt heavy. I made an early dinner and sat watching the fire as the light drained out of the sky. Around 9 p.m., I noticed something again. The forest had gone completely silent. No wind, no insects, nothing. That kind of silence is unnatural out there. Usually you can hear the faint chirping or rustling all night. I remember sitting still, staring into the dark trees, trying to hear something. That's when I caught a faint sound, like slow crunching. Not directly near me, but somewhere in the dark beyond the trees. It wasn't constant. It would stop, then start again. Crunch, pause. Crunch, pause. I turned off my flashlight, thinking maybe my eyes would adjust better. I sat there trying to focus, barely breathing. The sound came closer, then stopped again. I could feel my heart thudding in my chest. Then something broke a branch, loud, sharp, way too close. I grabbed my flashlight and swept the beam toward the sound. Nothing, just the pines and darkness. But the silence felt loaded, like something was out there holding its breath. I didn't move for what felt like 10 minutes. Then, slowly, I started hearing the night sounds again. Crickets, wind, like whatever had been there was gone. I didn't sleep that night either. I stayed awake, inside my tent, knife in hand, listening. Sometime past midnight, I heard something faint again. But this time, it sounded like me. Footsteps moving in short bursts, circling, stopping. And then I swear I heard breathing. Slow, uneven breathing just outside the tent wall. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I could hear it so clearly, the low rasp of air, like someone trying not to breathe too loud. It went on for maybe a minute, then slowly faded away into the distance. I stayed frozen until sunrise. When light finally came, I got out and looked around. I found tracks again, bare footprints circling the tent. This time, I could see them clearly in the dirt. The size looked similar to mine, but the shape wasn't right. The toes were stretched, uneven, and there were strange drag marks behind a few prints, like something was limping or pulling one leg. I started packing up, fast. I didn't care about staying another night. I wanted out of there, but before I left, something made me stop. Near one of the trees about 50 yards from camp, I saw something hanging. I walked closer, thinking maybe it was trash or fabric. It wasn't. It was a dead coyote, or what was left of one. The body had been split open down the middle, like it had been sliced with something sharp. The skin was pulled back, and the head was twisted at an angle that didn't look natural. The front paws were missing entirely. It looked deliberate, not like an animal kill, more like something had displayed it. That was it for me. I threw my stuff in the car and left the site as fast as I could. The dirt road was rough, and my tires kicked up clouds of red dust. I didn't even look in the rearview mirror. By the time I hit the main highway, the air felt lighter again. I stopped at a gas station about an hour later to calm down. My hands were shaking while I filled the tank. The attendant asked if I'd been camping, probably because I looked filthy and tired. I nodded but didn't say much. That night, I checked into a cheap motel outside Flagstaff. I took the longest shower of my life and tried to sleep, but every small sound made me flinch. I kept picturing those footprints, that animal hanging from the tree. I told myself maybe it was just some psycho hunter trying to scare people away. But that breathing outside my tent, I can still hear it if I think about it too much. The next morning, I drove back home to Tucson and tried to forget about it. I never told anyone for a long time, but a few months later, while watching some hiking videos online, I came across a post about strange encounters in northern Arizona. One guy mentioned seeing something on two legs running through the woods near Loop, about 20 miles from where I camped. He said it looked human but moved wrong, like its joints didn't bend the right way. I shut my laptop right then, I didn't want to read more. It's been almost 10 years now. I've gone camping plenty since then, but never alone, and never that far north again. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about those footprints in the dust, how they just stopped halfway through the clearing, as if whatever made them didn't need to walk anymore. People like to say there are things out there we can't explain. I don't care what anyone believes. All I know is that something was watching me in those woods. Something that breathed like a man, walked like a man, but wasn't, and it wanted me to know it was there. It was the summer of 2014 when I decided to go camping alone in southern France. I was 28, working a desk job in Lyon, and I needed a break from the noise, the traffic, the same faces every day. I'd been wanting to see the countryside near the Savin National Park, a quiet area filled with forests, rivers, and small villages that looked like they hadn't changed in decades. I had camped before, but never alone in a foreign place like that. Something about the idea of being completely isolated, away from everyone, felt freeing. At the time, it didn't cross my mind that being that isolated also meant being vulnerable. I drove my small hatchback up into the hills, the road getting narrower and rougher until it was just gravel and dirt. The trees on both sides were thick, tall pines mixed with dry brush, and there wasn't a single car in sight. My GPS kept losing signal, but I didn't care. I wanted to be off the map for a few days. Around late afternoon, I found a clearing near a stream that curved through the forest. It was quiet except for the sound of insects and the faint trickle of water. Felt perfect. I set up my small green tent near the edge of the trees, close enough to the stream that I could wash and get water, but far enough that it wouldn't flood if it rained. The sun was still high, and I spent the next hour gathering dry wood, setting up a small fire pit with stones, and organizing my backpack. I had canned food, a flashlight, a small hatchet, and a cheap gas stove. I remember feeling proud of how well I'd prepared everything. By evening, the air had cooled, and the forest turned quiet except for the constant sound of cicadas. I made a simple dinner of beans and bread, sitting by the fire and watching the smoke drift upward through the trees. When the last bit of sunlight disappeared, the forest became completely black beyond the reach of my firelight. It was strange how quickly the wilderness could make you feel small. I sat there for a while, staring into the dark, until I heard what I thought was a branch snap somewhere in the trees. It wasn't close, but it was clear enough to make me stop chewing. At first, I told myself it was probably a deer or maybe just a branch falling. I tried to ignore it and went back to eating, but then I heard another one, this time closer. I looked into the trees, my flashlight trembling slightly in my hand. The beam of light didn't reach far, just illuminated the first line of trees. I didn't see anything, but I could feel the hairs rise on my arms. After a while, I convinced myself I was overreacting. Still, I decided to throw the rest of my food in a sealed bag and hang it on a branch, just in case some animal was sniffing around. That night, I couldn't sleep well. Every small sound outside the tent made me open my eyes. The forest was alive with noises I didn't recognize. Something scurrying across leaves, the occasional owl call, the wind moving through the branches. Around 3 a.m., I heard footsteps, slow, uneven, crunching the dry leaves just outside the tent. I froze. My first thought was that it was a wild boar, but the steps sounded too deliberate, too heavy. I didn't move. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The steps stopped for a while, then started again, this time circling around my tent. I remember lying there, gripping the small knife I kept next to my sleeping bag. The sound moved slowly to the other side, then stopped completely. I didn't dare unzip the tent. For nearly an hour, I lay still, listening. Nothing. Eventually, exhaustion won, and I must have drifted off sometime before dawn. When I woke up, the forest was calm again. Sunlight filtered through the trees, and the air smelled like wet earth. For a moment, I thought maybe I had imagined the whole thing. But when I stepped outside, I saw footprints in the soft dirt near the back of my tent. They weren't from an animal. They were human boot prints, large ones, leading in a slow path around the tent and back into the woods. I stood there for a long time, staring at them. My hands were shaking slightly. I checked all my stuff. Nothing was missing, not even the food bag I'd hung up. That somehow made it worse. Whoever it was hadn't come for food. They were just there, watching. I told myself I'd leave that day, but after packing some of my gear and walking down to the stream, I decided to stay one more night. Maybe I was just letting my imagination ruin what could be a peaceful trip. The rest of the day went fine. I hiked a bit, collected more firewood, tried to clear my head. But when the sun began to drop again, that uneasy feeling came back stronger. The second night was colder. The air felt heavier, quieter. I tried to keep the fire going bright, thinking the light might make me feel safer. Around midnight, I saw something across the stream. At first, I thought it was a shadow, but then I noticed a shape. A person standing completely still on the opposite side among the trees. I couldn't see his face, just a tall, thin figure wearing a dark jacket. My stomach dropped. He didn't move, didn't step forward, didn't say anything. Just stood there. The fire crackled softly beside me, and I could feel the heat on my face, but everything else around me felt cold. I stared at him for a long time, trying to convince myself it was just my eyes playing tricks in the dark. Then, slowly, the figure turned and walked back into the forest, disappearing into the blackness. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the flashlight in one hand and the knife in the other, sitting upright inside my tent until the first light of dawn touched the trees. As soon as I could see clearly, I started packing everything up. My hands moved fast, clumsy, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get out. When I went to cross the stream to check where the figure had stood, I saw more footprints in the mud. Again, large boots, deep impressions. There were cigarette butts nearby, still damp but fresh. Someone had been standing there for a while, watching my campsite. I left everything I couldn't carry and started the car. The narrow dirt road back down felt endless. Every time I looked in the rearview mirror, I half expected to see someone walking behind me. I didn't stop until I reached a small village about 20 kilometers away. I parked near a cafe and just sat there, breathing, watching the normal life of people going about their day. Later that afternoon, I told a man at the gas station that I'd seen someone near my campsite. He said there had been reports recently about a drifter, some middle-aged man who had been spotted hanging around remote trails, scaring hikers. He didn't say much else, just shrugged like it was nothing unusual. I drove back to Lyon that same evening and didn't tell anyone else about it. For weeks afterward, I'd wake up in the middle of the night thinking I heard footsteps outside my apartment window, even though I lived on the 4th floor. It's been years since that trip. I've gone camping again since then, but never alone. Sometimes, when I think back on that night in the forest, I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't woken up when I did, or if I'd stepped out of the tent to check who was there. Maybe it was just a man passing through, maybe he meant no harm. But the way he stood there, silent, watching, felt wrong in a way I can't forget. I still remember those footprints circling my tent. Whoever he was, he didn't want food or shelter. He wanted to get close enough to see me, and that thought has never left me. It was the summer of 2014, and I was 23, restless and tired of city noise. I'd been living in Dallas for 2 years, working long shifts at a hardware warehouse, and I hadn't taken a real break in months. One Friday, I decided to spend the weekend camping alone at a place called Rattlesnake Ridge in Oklahoma. I'd seen pictures online, thick pine woods, quiet lakes, long trails, the kind of spot where you could actually hear your own heartbeat if you stood still long enough. I drove up early Saturday morning, my old 2002 Ford Ranger packed with a tent, a cooler, some canned food, a small propane stove, and my .22 rifle. I wasn't really going to hunt, just wanted it for safety. The drive took about 4 hours. Once I got off the main highway, the roads narrowed into rough dirt paths that twisted through miles of forest. There weren't any houses for at least 20 miles after the last gas station. By the time I reached the main clearing near the ridge, the sun was starting to dip behind the trees. The whole place felt untouched. No cell service, no man-made sound except the crunch of my boots on dry leaves. I picked a flat area beside a small creek, just far enough from the ridge's base. I set up my tent, got a fire going, cooked a can of chili, and sat for a while just listening to the water move over the rocks. It felt perfect, quiet, private, calm. That night I didn't sleep much, though. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of something moving near my tent. It wasn't loud, just slow steps, crunch, pause, crunch. I froze, listening. First, I thought it was a deer. Then I remembered I'd left a few food scraps in the cooler, not sealed tight. I figured it was probably a raccoon or maybe a coyote sniffing around. I waited it out. The steps went on for a few minutes, then faded away. The next morning, I checked the area. My cooler had been dragged a few feet, the lid half open, and a can of beans had fallen out. There were muddy prints near it. Small, but definitely not from a raccoon. Looked like boots. I remember staring at them for a long time, trying to convince myself maybe it was just my own tracks from the night before. But these ones circled my tent, slow and deliberate. I brushed it off. Maybe some hiker had wandered too close. Maybe someone was camping nearby. Still, I didn't see or hear anyone that day. I hiked for a few hours up to the ridge, watched the view from the top, miles of forest rolling out in every direction, thick and endless. On my way back, I saw an old wooden hunting stand about 50 yards from my camp. It looked like it hadn't been used in years. By the time I got back, the air was heavy and the sky looked bruised, dark clouds building in the distance. A storm was coming. I gathered more firewood, made dinner early, and double-checked everything before crawling into my tent. Around midnight, the rain hit, came down hard, hammering the tent walls, wind howling through the trees. I could smell wet earth and pine needles and that metallic tang rain brings when it's heavy enough to drown out everything else. Then, through all that noise, I heard something, faint, but sharp enough to slice through the rain. It was a thud, then another, like someone stepping carefully on wet ground. I sat up, listening again. The thunder rolled overhead. Another thud, closer this time. I thought maybe a branch had fallen, but then I heard a zipper sound, soft but unmistakable. The flap of my tent moved slightly, just enough for me to see a shape outside. I didn't move or breathe. My hand went straight for the rifle lying beside my sleeping bag. I clicked the safety off as quietly as I could. Whoever it was didn't speak. The shape just stayed there for a few seconds, then backed away. I heard the footsteps again, this time fading toward the creek. I waited until the rain slowed to a drizzle before stepping outside. My flashlight beam cut through the mist. The ground was a mess of footprints, mine, but also another set leading away into the woods. Bare feet, no shoes. I followed them for maybe 30 yards before they disappeared into the wet brush. I turned back fast after that, heart pounding. The rest of the night I sat awake, rifle across my lap, fire burning low. The forest sounded alive in a way it hadn't before. Branches cracking, water dripping, something small moving just out of sight. I didn't sleep at all. To first light, I packed everything up fast. The rain had stopped, but the woods felt heavier somehow, quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. I loaded the truck and started the engine. The tires spun a bit in the mud before catching. The dirt road out was narrow and slick, and I drove slow, glancing in the mirror every few seconds even though I knew it was pointless. About a mile from the clearing, I saw it. A tent, small and ragged, half collapsed in the trees just off the road. I almost kept going, but something made me stop. I got out, left the engine running, and walked over. The tent was filthy, soaked through, looked like it had been there for weeks. Inside were a few things: an old blanket, some empty food cans, a pair of muddy pants, and a torn backpack. But what really got me was the cooler. It was mine. My old Coleman cooler, the one that had gone missing from my campsite the night before. It had my initials carved into the lid. I didn't touch anything else. I backed away slowly, got into my truck, and drove the rest of that road without stopping again. When I finally reached the paved highway, I pulled over, shut off the engine, and sat there for a long time. My hands were shaking, and I could still smell the wet forest in my clothes. I never called the police. I don't know why. Maybe because I didn't really want to explain why I'd been camping alone with a rifle, or maybe because I knew they wouldn't find anyone. Whoever that person was, they'd been living out there, probably for a while. Watching campers, stealing food, maybe worse. The thought of how close they got to me that night still makes my skin crawl. A week later, I went through my camping gear again, trying to put it all back in order. My boots were still muddy, the tent still damp. When I reached into one of the side pockets of my backpack, I found something that didn't belong there. A small, flat rock, smooth and gray, with a single dirty fingerprint smeared across it. I never put it there. That was the last time I went camping alone. I sold the tent, got rid of the rifle, and started spending weekends indoors. I still see pictures of Rattlesnake Ridge sometimes. People fishing, hiking, smiling in front of the same pine trees I slept under. They look peaceful, but every time I see one of those photos, I can't help scanning the tree line behind them. I don't even know what I'm looking for. Maybe just proof that someone's still out there, still walking those woods barefoot, waiting for the next tent light to flicker in the dark.